in the most desperate moments. You know, I think Brits and Australians share that capacity to see the lighter side and lighten up when all around them is despair.
That's right. You knew Paddy Ashton. I used to run the Liberal Democrat Party in England, and he was a fine soldier, and he told me that the Marines were always proud of the fact that on one occasion when they were being bombed by their own planes, one of them said we shouldn't have joined up if we couldn't take a joke. That kind of thing lifts people's mood. It's not just that they laugh, but it does something good to us. And I was in Sarajevo about 5 years ago, and they were showing me how it had been when the Serbs were up in the hills lobbing shells down. And, you know, it was a terrible time. For 4 years they were in this valley with the Serbs lobbing shells and shooting people with telescopic sighted rifles when they crossed the street. And what they used to do is after dark, when they could move around, they converted an underground car park into a cinema, and they used to go there and watch comedy, a lot of it Monty Python. And they said the extraordinary thing was that when they came out, they felt better, but nothing had changed. It was just as bad as when they went in, but they felt better. So there's something about laughing that moves us to a very healthy part of ourselves.
I entirely agree, and we'll circle back onto that because we're losing that ability to laugh at ourselves. That, I know that concerns you and it concerns me, the new age of sort of censoriousness. But before we do, can I ask you, what was it about Britain in the 60s and the 70s? You'd had that terrible Second World War. In many ways, Britain was not doing so terribly well financially.
Financially, no, but
tough.
There was a general confidence that things would get better.
Hope.
Yes. No, but a confidence. It was more than we knew things were going to get better. And we knew there was a lot of stuff we have to get rid of, stuffy, prejudice stuff, all of that. We knew that had to go. But we still knew that it was going to get better. And that's what people don't have now. They can't say, yes, it's going to get better, because we don't know if it is going to get better. So I think that affects our mood a huge. And the other thing is the rate of change at the moment. If you look at the psychological data, what makes humans anxious is change. And there's a huge rate of change at the moment. And people get anxious about everything. They want some sort of strong man in charge who's going to put things right. It's rubbish, of course, but that's what people deep down want. And that's why there's this resurgence, I think, of dictators all over the world.
Yeah, I've often observed in talking to other people that we seem to be living in an age of what one commentator's called an emocracy rather than a democracy. We feel everything rather than think it through.
Yeah, well, there's a sort of an extreme woke position, which is that you should always trust your feelings, which is a good idea if you're in the jungle and there's a tiger looking at you. But otherwise, you want to say, well, hasn't therapy since Freud been about examining your feelings and discover which of your feelings help you to have a better life and which are actually hindering? Because feelings are just, you can talk about them and say, this is not a helpful emotion for you. And that's what cognitive behavioral psychology is about at the moment. It's about taking the way that people think and getting them to look at it, reframe that thing in a way that's more positive. And yet the extreme wokes are saying, we shouldn't do that, we should accept every feeling. Well, supposing I think I'm Hitler.
Perhaps it's tied up with a sort of, the great virtue today seems to be self-discovery, self-autonomy. My body is my property, I will do with myself and whatever I like, whenever I like, it's all about me. And there's a loss of community with that. There's a lack of awareness that we actually all have to relate to one another.
Well, I remember Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society.
Never quite understood what she meant by that.
Well, I think what she meant is there's a whole lot of individuals, and I think if you read the right stuff, like Jonathan Haidt, for example, you begin to see how our relationship with the people around us is what really determines the quality of our life. There's a thing, do you know about the blue zones? the 7 blue zones where people live longer and are happier and don't have psychosomatic illness and live much happier lives. There's one in California, and when they went there and tried to find out why everyone was so happy, and they tried everything. They sort of looked at the pylons to see if this was something to do with the electricity, or and the water they looked at, and in the end they discovered that the people in that town had all come from the same place in Italy. They'd all said, "It's great here, come." So there was a sort of communal feeling that the Italians have, which determine their really good mental and physical health. But it took them a long time to figure out that that was the factor that was making the difference, not individual competitive achievement.
Roger Scruton pointed out that it's a bit of a nonsense if you stop and think about it for very long, because we come into this world totally dependent on others supporting us, making way for us.
Yes.
That extends quite a way into life, really.
Well, to get to my stage where I have a tour manager I refer to as my carer.
So even at a practical level, this idea that I can just be who I feel I am, carried to absurd extents, really.
Well, the Dalai Lama said something very simple, and I think it's completely true. He says, if you want to be happy, be unselfish. When you're doing things for other people, you're going to be happier than if you're doing things for yourself. It's very hard for an American to hear that and to realize that it's actually true.